On behalf of the Bureau of Justice Assistance, BJA, we welcome you to the Safer Schools Knowledge College on effective de-escalation strategies for school resource officers, security personnel, and school staff in a K-12 environment. Just as a reminder, the opinions, findings, and conclusions of the moderator and the presenter are those of their own and not those of BJA or the Department of Justice. I am your moderator for today. I'm Rhonda Shaw, Senior Research Associate with the Institute for Intergovernmental Research, IAR, which manages the Bureau of Justice Safer Schools Training and Technical Assistance Clearinghouse for law enforcement. Safer Schools is supported by BJA's Stop School Violence program, and we provide free training and technical assistance to law enforcement and school safety stakeholders serving the K-12 populations to prevent school violence. Our objectives for today's session are to explain the National De-escalation Training Center de-escalation model and its utilization of the DISC, dominance, influence, steadiness, and conscientiousness personality model to tailor responses to individuals, and then to apply personality-based de-escalation techniques into crisis interventions with students, guardians, faculty, and staff. I'd like to now introduce our presenters for today. We have Dr. Tamara Lynn. She's chair and professor for criminal justice at Fort Hays State University and serves as director of the National De-escalation Training Center's Central Region Training Center and as executive council president. Dr. Lynn also has experience at the local school level as a program director. We are also honored to have Sergeant David Belasing, and he has more than 22 years of military experience and civilian law enforcement experience and serves as a trainer for the National De-escalation Training Center. Dr. Lynn and Sergeant Belasing, we are so happy to have both of you. We're so glad that you could join us for this discussion today. Along with these Knowledge College presentations, Safer Schools has been hosting monthly communities of practice, and we are finding that de-escalation is one of the hot topics. And one of the guiding principles for SROs laid out in the COPS office is that school resource officers should not be involved in school discipline. Yet we know that many times teachers and other staff aren't necessarily trained in those areas. So when situations arise that test those emotional and behavior boundaries of the students, the staff, and even the law enforcement officers, and it's important we know that there are skill sets necessary to prevent these incidents from escalating so that there is not a negative impact on the safety and well-being of everyone involved. So I know that we have a limited amount of time together here today, but I thought that maybe we could just start with covering giving a little background on the mission and the services offered by the National De-escalation Center, Training Center. Like, what do you do? What's your mission? Just give us some context around that, please.
So thank you, Rhonda, for that introduction. And myself and David Belasing are excited to be here today. NDTC is a national network of regional de-escalation training centers, and our mission is to deliver the most advanced level 3 de-escalation training around. We are that network that includes several centers, 3 of which are funded by the COPS office, and 1 of them through a BJA grant as well. NDTC trains in DISC Esoterica, which offers the most significant advancement to the DISC model since it was originated in 1928. We have 3 training modalities that include our most popular course, which is a 16-hour de-escalation principles and practice. We also offer a train the trainer course. And then we have an 8-hour fundamentals course available both online and in person. We're able to offer this training to law enforcement agencies across the U.S. at no cost due to our grants. And while this particular program was developed for law enforcement, it is relevant to all professionals working with individuals. And we are the only level 3 de-escalation provider training both nationally and across the globe, which brings us to today's webinar. So we'll just get into looking at the different levels here as you see on your screen. Level 1 training gets into traditional forms of de-escalation through procedural justice. And this is the idea that cooperation and compliance from the community is highly dependent upon the perception that law enforcement are legitimately there to help. This also applies to the school setting where students and parents see that educators, whether that be staff, faculty, or administrators, that they are legitimately there to help. Most law enforcement agencies across the US, they train in traditional de-escalation. And while this is useful, it is tailored more as a cookie cutter approach for responding to citizens and fails to take into account differences in personality. Level 2, that includes a primer on crisis intervention. This level addresses trauma-informed care. It considers how physical or mental health issues and even developmental issues may interfere with our ability to de-escalate, as well as someone who has a substance abuse issue. So what this training brings then is level 3, which augments levels 1 and 2 to add rapid personality identification. And this is so responses to subjects are tailored specifically to their personality rather than using that cookie cutter approach. So this increases our effectiveness, not only in recognizing the type of individual they are, but helping to tailor that very rapid response to gain compliance much sooner. So today's webinar will describe and discuss this level 3 de-escalation and how it's useful for both sworn and non-sworn personnel, in this case, working in the school system. While we only have time to provide an overview of NDTC's course, attendees are welcome to request additional information at a link that will be dropped into the chat. So with that, we're going to get into basic DISC, which is the foundation of our course. Rapid personality identification begins with 2 basic questions. The first question looks at whether an individual is outgoing or reserved. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself here. So when we think about individuals who are outgoing, these are individuals with high activity level. They may be more animated, not only in just their body language, but facial expressions, talking more, speaking much quicker. They can be very emotional or aggressive. And that's different than someone who's reserved. These individuals tend to move at a slower pace. They speak more softly. They may not be as quick to interject their opinion, may be more discerning, as well as having guarded gestures. So answering this first question is something that we can do just almost immediately in visiting with someone looking at those external behaviors. The second question then, it looks at whether someone is task or people oriented. So we may be able to answer this question immediately, but typically it comes with conversation. So within the first question we may ask them or the first comment they make, we can see whether they're task or people oriented. So that task orientation would look at whether they're wanting to get their schoolwork done or whether the teacher gave them an errand, as opposed to someone who's people oriented. They're worried about their friends, worried about someone else maybe treating their friends unfairly. So our task individuals, They focus on functions. These individuals are excellent planners, very motivated to get their work completed. They don't tend to smile as much, and they certainly don't like distractions. So someone who's task-oriented may be agitated by classmates who are distracting them while they're trying to get their work done. People, on the other hand, as I already mentioned, they're more concerned about their friends, but they like to be with others. They might be the person in the corner who keeps talking and distracting that person who's task-oriented. They have concerns for other people's welfare. So from this quadrant, we see that D's and I's are outgoing, D's on the task orientation side and I's on the people side. And then S's and C's, they're reserved, with S's being people-oriented and C's being task-oriented. So we're going to go over each of these in detail, both in describing the personality as well as offering some examples of how you can de-escalate or stabilize a situation based on these personalities. So beginning with the D, these individuals are outgoing and task-oriented. The D personality, they need challenges or they get bored easily. They can be very dominant, direct, can come across as demanding, but they like results. They want to get things done. Some of their weaknesses is they really struggle to relax and they're not very patient. As shown here, the D personality poses an above average potential for risk because they're naturally more aggressive and outgoing, they're less people-oriented, and they're more impulsive. So this particular list shows some ways that we can stabilize or de-escalate a D. We want to recognize the impact that their behavior has on their ability to conduct or complete tasks. And we want to bring that to their attention. We may want to say to an elementary student that we want to help them get this taken care of so that they don't miss recess having to complete work. Similarly, for a middle school or high school student, that we would hate to see them be late for practice because they have to stay after school. But what we can do is provide choices, like, would you rather do this now, or would you rather do this, and then giving them that other time frame. D's, they appreciate being spoken to in a direct manner, the same way that they're going to speak to other people. So David, could you give us an example of how we might de-escalate a D personality?
Yeah, so for a common example of that type D personality, if you're at a sporting event, maybe the kids' football game, whatnot, this might be the parent, the adult up in the stadium who's yelling profanities and cuss words at the referees and the coaches. When you go up there to talk to them about their behavior, they start off with hot button comments like, "Don't you know who I am?" or "I pay your salary," trying to assert that dominance and control over you. The keys here is going to be to avoid those hot button topics, maintain some good self-control, but then come up with some options that can help them with their task. If they're wanting to watch that game and see it through to the end, then letting them know that if their behavior continues, they're not going to get to finish that task. But if they're willing to let that behavior or reel in that behavior, then maybe they can stay and watch the game. Other options might include arresting them for disorderly conduct or whatever criminal charges might be applicable. For a school administrator or a principal, you might see them arguing with a student or maybe another parent in the hallway, and they're saying things to that student like, "I'm in charge here. This is my school. You have to do what I say." In that case, again, you're going to want to avoid any hot button topics and focus on the mission they're trying to get accomplished. Give them some options of things that they can do so that they can focus on what's more important. So if you're there to de-escalate the situation, telling them that, "Hey, if you wouldn't mind going pulling video or completing a written statement for me, I can go ahead and address this task for you and handle it."
Thank you, David. Moving on to the I personality, these individuals are still outgoing, but they're people-oriented. Influence is important to them. They want to influence others. So words that we can use to describe this personality includes inspiring, interesting. These individuals love public recognition. They like being the center of attention. They're very popular as well as friendly. These might be the individuals in the hallway in the morning at the lockers where others are just coming around them to hear their story about what they did over the weekend or what they have planned for after school. Eyes need the opportunity to talk. And they do need that opportunity to be an influence. And our goal is to ensure they're a positive influence. And there's ways that we can do that. We'll get to those in just a moment, but some of the weaknesses for the eye, they struggle to focus on time and details because they're busy doing fun things, busy hanging out with their friends. They're easily distracted. They may struggle to take accountability for things. Need to recognize that it's important to talk less and listen more, as well as give credit to others when credit is due. As shown on the slide, eyes pose an average potential for risk. So similar to the D, they are outgoing and tend to be more animated and impulsive, but they're also very emotional and less logical. So eyes are going to be less apt to consider consequences for their actions. They may have a very sensitive ego, and they need that attention. So with an eye, if they're being singled out in the classroom and getting negative attention, they're going to turn that on the teacher or the staff member and give them equally negative attention so that they aren't as embarrassed in front of their friends. These are the ones who like to make authority figures look bad so that they're not the only ones being treated negatively in their perception. So things that we can do to stabilize or de-escalate an eye is give them a compliment. This is significant for interrupting the escalated behavior. Compliments can be very simple, such as, hey, I hear you were very helpful for the teacher this morning. Or something as simple as, wow, did you get a new shirt? I really like that. But what that does is that interrupts the negative behavior and brings the attention back to them. So this personality needs an opportunity to vent. If we don't provide this, this can actually have a negative impact of escalating their behavior because they want to focus on their side of the story. They want to focus on what's going on with them. David, can you provide us an example for this?
Yeah, this might be the student, whether it's in middle school or high school, who's been sharing inappropriate photos, or maybe they got caught with a little bit of tobacco or some marijuana, and now they've been pulled into the office to have a conversation. The keys here is to minimize those consequences and give them a way to save face. Give them a voice, let them tell their side of the story. So when that kid starts chiming off about how it's not a big deal or everybody does it, they might say things like, don't you know who my dad is? Trying to influence the outcome a little bit. We're going to avoid those hot button topics as well. But then we're going to give them that voice. Let them get it all out and vent. Then we come up with our options that will help tailor towards that minimizing those consequences. So letting them know that cooperation will help with a positive outcome on their character, whereas any interference might result in additional charges and they might get in more trouble. And we wouldn't want to see them get in more trouble than they have to.
Thank you, David. So now we move down to the reserved side of our quadrant. And getting into the S, words that we like to use to describe the S include supportive of others. They're very sweet. They tend to be shy. S is like security and harmony in their environment. S's enjoy being appreciated, but they don't like the public recognition that an I would want. So this would be an individual, we might just pat them on the shoulder and say, you know, I really appreciate your help today, or I appreciate that you're working hard on your schoolwork while others are being distracting. And then the S is very selfless because they're always thinking about others. Now, weaknesses for the S is they struggle to say no. So if you get into the middle school and high school students, they may be taking on a lot just because they don't want to tell their friends or their instructors, or maybe even people in their extracurricular activities no. They struggle with change. These are individuals who are not comfortable when there's changes coming. And they struggle to take command of situations. They need to understand that it's okay for them to stand their ground. So as the slide shows, the S personality poses a below average potential for risk, as these individuals usually are going to hold in their emotions. Part of the problem with that, though, is that they can become very passive aggressive towards others. So if they feel like they've been targeted, or more appropriately, if they feel one of their friends has been targeted, they may just stuff those emotions, but at some point they can't stuff anymore, and then those emotions explode. So individuals are really caught off guard when the S personality explodes because they never see that type of behavior out of them. Approaches for reducing the chance of risk or to de-escalate the S includes listening, expressing understanding, so getting into those active listening skills where we're validating their feelings, we're speaking softly, we may be standing in closer proximity, and then asking for help from an S. So that could also be a pattern interrupt in the classroom. If we see an S getting agitated, teacher or a staff member could say, hey, I need your help for a minute. Will you come with me? And given the ability to help others, will decrease that risk of escalation. And we also want to focus on whether or not they're okay, because S's are so worried about others that sometimes they really struggle to focus on their own needs. So David, could you give us an example on this one?
Like you'd mentioned, this might be that kid, whether they're in middle school or high school, who their friend's been getting bullied and they've been sitting back watching, just trying to maintain the peace and harmony, but eventually they get fed up with it. They can only take so much and they decide, no, they're stepping up today. They get between the bully and their friend and they push the bully back because they're there to protect their friend and they've crossed that line. They might say things like, you're not going to say that to my friend. You can't do that to my friend. And they make sure they emphasize the people in their life that's important to them. In this situation, it's going to be important to restore that harmony, right? Get them back to a level where they feel safe and secure, separating the parties involved, and then getting their side of the story so that they feel like you're actually going to be able to take all of the concerns into consideration so that you can make a fair and appropriate decision. Um, for them, it's just going to be all about how can you help them and be accommodating, right? They might have done something wrong in the moment, but if you actually listen to their voice, maybe it's something that can be handled in an appropriate manner.
Thank you, David. So then our last personality style is the C. Words that we can use to describe the C include cautious, conscientious. C's are very logical, they're competent, they're calculating. These might be the students who are interested in math and science classes. C's need details, so they're going to ask a lot of questions. They're going to ask why, and they'll continue to do that until they get a response that truly answers the question they have. This can come across as very antagonizing and very irritating for people working with them, especially if they don't understand that they need those details. So as long as they're continuing to ask questions, that means they still don't have the information they need. Weaknesses of the C personality is they tend to be perfectionists. This can lead to problems with turning their homework in on time because they're concerned that it's just not good enough. Or if they're working on a group project with classmates, they may be the ones slowing it down because they don't like what everyone else is doing and they want to get in there and make sure the presentation is perfect. I'm sure most of you have heard of analysis paralysis, where they just struggle to make a decision because they continue to analyze. C's also struggle to understand emotions. They're going to have pretty flat affect. We won't see a lot of emotion on their face. Their personality poses the lowest risk. The fact that they are so logical, C's are going to consider consequences before acting out. They're not likely to engage in an argument unless they have the details and know or assume that they are correct. So situations that will escalate a C, that gets into if they're being provided incorrect information or they're being told they're wrong. Now, C's, like anybody else, can be wrong, but the way we want to approach it with them is, I hear you saying this, I see where you're coming from, but let me give it to you the way I see it. And then that doesn't threaten their ego, but it also gives them the information which they need. So approaches that we can use to stabilize or reduce escalation include providing as many details as possible, really getting into the nuts and bolts, the policies and procedures. We need to answer their questions. C's also need the opportunity to talk, but for different reasons than the I. The C, they need to be able to describe the details from their perspective. And then finally, we need to be patient because those questions can be irritating, especially when we have lesson plans we're trying to get through. Other students are getting irritable. So just giving them that time to give those details and then following with your own details decreases the likelihood for further escalation. David, can you give us an example on working with a C personality?
So this might be your high school student that gets caught with some drugs and they start arguing and trying to claim that they know the rules better than you know the rules, saying things like, you can't search me, I know the law better than you, I have my rights, you can't do these things without my parents present, you can't ask me questions without parents present. They're going to try to assert that they know the information better than you. The important thing here is, again, give them a voice, let them get their concerns out, and be prepared to answer any questions they might have. And if they don't have questions, then be prepared to explain to them the process and the procedure. So in this case, letting them know what laws allow you to do the search and why it is that you're detaining them, and then what the steps are from there, that there's going to be a citation issued or the report will be referred to your local county attorney, whatever that process may be. And if they're wanting to make a complaint or continue to contest it, the important thing with the type Cs is not to argue with them. Just simply explain to them the process and procedure of how they need to go about filing that complaint. So if there's a school process for it, let them know what the school process is. If there's a judicial process, point them down that path as well.
Thank you, David. So we've given you, just like I mentioned, just a little bit of information that gets you familiar with our training, and incorporating these steps will yield success for teachers, staff, administrators, as well as SROs. If you're interested in more information about the training, a link was provided in the chat box. Just go on there and you can fill in your information request. So now we will move to some questions. We did receive a few questions up front that we'll start with in terms of answering those, and then we'll get into the chat box and answer as many as we can. Rhonda, are we ready to move forward with questions?
We are ready to move forward with questions.
Great. So our first question that we'll respond to has to do with communicating with parents, especially when they overhear escalated comments such as, "I want to kill myself." So we can use these same personality styles in working with parents and students. So if we recognize that a parent is being very direct, like the D, we need to respond in a similar manner. So David, can you give an example specific to a parent?
So if the parent overheard maybe their child or another child was suicidal and they had a concern about it, they might come up and say things like, why aren't you getting something done? Why aren't you doing something about this? You need to be taking care of this. And again, those are all task-oriented comments. So we know that they're probably going to be that type D personality. For them, it's going to be a short, sweet, hey, this is what we're doing and this is why we're doing it. Just letting them know to the point and be direct back with them so that they know you are working on it and heading towards that solution. And then give them some options of how maybe they can help because they are concerned about the person at some level, giving those options to them tailored around, well, obviously you're concerned for this person, but here's some choices of how you could help this situation as well.
And things you might hear a high I say are, this is embarrassing my child, or you're making me look bad. So giving that parent a compliment and saying, you know, you obviously are very concerned about your child, that will interrupt that pattern. That'll be the pattern interrupt. And then just working together with them of what do you recommend that will make both your child look better and you not to feel embarrassed, and listen to their suggestions at that point. I don't want to give examples of all the DIS and C. We'll try to incorporate those into some of our other questions. So the next one is, what are the best hands-off practices to intervene a fight among students? This gets into identifying the student who seems to be the greater threat and pulling their attention away from the other student. So this is a traditional law enforcement move. I will defer to David to respond to this one.
Yeah, so when you're talking hands off, I mean, the first thing you got to do is have some officer presence. Just because you're present does not mean that you have presence. So you got to be able to set the tone appropriately. If you've done the work in advance and you've built rapport with your community and your school, when you show up and they know you're there, that's going to help. But if you haven't had that opportunity, you're going to have to set the stage, and the situation dictates. If they're actively fighting, that may be a situation where you got to get in there and use hands-on. If they're able to actually hear you, maybe it's just a simple tone inflection, that authoritative police stop as you're making your approach. But again, safety is paramount. If somebody's safety is in jeopardy, that is not the time to be super worried about de-escalation. That is the time to be taking action. And whatever action you take needs to be rooted in your policies, procedures.
I just want to jump in here. Someone asked to repeat the strategies for the D part of the de-escalation strategies. Just know, guys, that we're recording this and it will be available to all of you. You'll get it via email, so you don't have to worry if you miss something. You can go back and hear that again. Okay.
Thank you, Rhonda. So another question we received is, what approach or terms should be avoided during the de-escalation process? First one is telling someone to calm down. So we want to avoid using that language, even thinking about ourselves. If someone tells us to just calm down, that can actually escalate a situation. Other things that we can, in terms of non-avoidance, if someone does need to calm down, just say, hey, why don't you take a deep breath with me? Just breathe with me for a little bit. And that'll have a much more calming effect and not escalate a situation. David, can you think of some other approaches or terms to avoid?
Well, that calm down is the big one. For the type D personality, telling them to relax, that's going to be huge because they don't like to relax. They like to get stuff done. And if you get in the way of that mission, it can aggravate them. So again, if we take a tool away from an officer, we need to make sure we're giving them a tool to use. The easiest one I find is giving the person a voice, because every person wants to have a voice. It's a human universal. So letting them know that you want to hear what they have to say, but maybe you can't hear them or understand them because of how loud they're yelling or how fast they're talking, will put that back on you and on their need, that motive to want to be able to be heard. So it'll give them an actual reason to want to lower that tone or to slow down and have that conversation.
Then another question we have is, how can we support teachers or other staff in de-escalation of students? So the information from this webinar will be a good start. This information is applicable regardless of whether you're law enforcement, teachers, administration, anyone else. And then do have your schools request additional information from the link provided in the chat box. Last question we have that came in early was, should de-escalation techniques used vary by specific populations? And they're asking in terms of like those with developmental disabilities, early childhood versus middle or high school. So David, I'll let you respond to that.
So based upon populations, especially when you're getting into your trauma-informed crisis intervention, yes, we do teach a completely different approach on that. We've got an 8-step process that we teach. And if somebody is suffering from trauma or some sort of crisis, or that are under the influence of drugs or alcohol, we do give them the tools to take during those steps. Tools like showing empathy, emotional labeling, creating time and space so that you can develop an understanding. We go into a good section on that during our level 2 de-escalation training.
We have
Thank
another question in the chat. How do you feel about bringing friends during de-escalation? You know, an angry parent, and often we approach alone as we feel 2 to 3 officers can escalate. Others feel show up with friends. What are your opinions about that?
So I'll start there and then defer to David after that. If I'm reading the question correctly, in terms of bringing friends, if it's an elementary student, depending on the personality, and this could apply elementary, middle, or high school, but if you're dealing with someone who's a high I personality, they're the ones, if they're embarrassed, they're going to try to make the authority figure look bad. So them having a friend there could escalate that situation further, especially if they're not getting the results that they want. An S may feel comforted. A D and a C, they're focused on task. They're not likely to bring friends along at all. Same could be said about the parents. A D-C parent is not likely to have someone else there. An I parent can escalate a situation just like an I student. Multiple officers can definitely escalate that situation. If it's stable, I do not recommend having multiple officers there. You should have multiple officers only if someone's going to have to go hands-on to ensure the safety of others. David, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, that one's going to boil down to safety. You've got to be able to read the situation for what it is. What's the totality of the circumstances that are going on here? Is it one person, and how agitated are they? What's the circumstances behind why they're so agitated? Are there weapons involved? What's the location? There's tons of situational elements that we got to take into consideration that are going to affect that. It may be a situation where you just need to create space, call for backup, and get more people there. It may be a situation where, no, you don't need the backup, or you know that that backup that's coming is that officer that might escalate the situation. So calling them off might be reasonable too. You've got to read the situation for what it is.
So this question is directed at David. And so what would you have recommended in the situation with the Texas administrator who was hurt after intervening in a student fight? And I don't know that you're familiar with that. They put a link, but we can't go to the link now.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that situation, so it would be unprofessional for me to make an evaluation.
How common is it to see dual disc personalities? And should the responses be a combination of the two sides of the de-escalation for those two personalities, or lean more towards one way or the other?
So none of us is entirely just a D, I, S, or C. And in our courses, we go into the disc blends. So a person could be a DI combination, meaning they're task and people oriented. So we need to respond to them in the mindset they are at that time. So are they talking about their task? Are they talking about how you're interfering with them getting their schoolwork finished? Then we would approach them from the D. But if they're starting to say, I'm so embarrassed, you're making me look bad, then we want to pull them away from the group and respond to them as the I. So that's an excellent question, and definitely one that if an individual was able to take our full course, which our fundamentals is also available as an online course, then we would get into that even more.
So is your training that you offer, is it only offered to law enforcement, or can teachers and others, other school stakeholders access it online? Is it available online?
So we can make that available online. There's some logistics, but if people are interested and fill out the request for information, then we can work with them from there.
Okay, perfect.
And that would include school staff.
Okay, perfect. How common is it to see, I'm sorry, we asked that already. Are there techniques coming from just are these techniques coming from just personal experiences, or is this based on research and or collaboration with mental health professionals?
So this was developed through a research project with at the University of South Florida.
Mhm.
And the crisis intervention component regarding people with mental and physical health ailments or under the influence of substances, that comes from crisis intervention training teams. That's also research validated. And then our particular training, we also conduct research on it. Out of the more than 3,000 officers that we have trained, which also includes some clinical responders, um, the results are evidence-based to show an improved response to an escalated subject from prior to the class to after the class. So this is validated.
Mhm. What is the best way to de-escalate between two students that are insulting one another back and forth in the middle of class?
Did you say insulting or assaulting?
Insulting.
David, I'll let you talk for a little bit.
Yeah, it's going to be a matter of listening to what's being said. Based upon the kind of comments that they're saying back and forth, you should be able to pick up on, whether or not they're the type D, I, S, or C, and then you could tailor appropriately from there. If you can't, that's okay. Number one, we start with procedural justice, right? We treat everybody the same, show them some dignity and respect. We fairly administer the law. We give everybody a voice, and we act and communicate without any prevailing biases. So you separate your parties and you start there. And as you're giving them a voice, you'll gather more information and you can start to tailor a little bit more specifically from there.
Are there any verbal or body language clues to look for that will show that an individual is calming?
So if you have an individual who is very escalated, they're not going to think as rationally. They're going to be yelling, screaming, they may be kicking, they may be knocking furniture over. Obviously, that is not a time where you're going to be able to de-escalate. So you need to give that individual time, space, and understanding. And as that adrenaline rush then starts to calm, they'll be more able to communicate. They will start thinking rationally. So if you ask them a question and they're able to respond appropriately, you know they're calming down. Obviously, if they're being quieter, they're not yelling, they're not pushing things over or throwing things, that's also a sign that they're calming down. But the main one is if they're able to start thinking and responding rationally. David, do you have anything to add to that one?
It just goes back to the difference between somebody who's in an active emotional state versus somebody who's in a passive emotional state. We do teach quite a bit on what to look for in their behaviors and body language. If they're in that active state, they're going to be yelling, screaming, venting. You're not going to be able to get very many words in, or if you do, they're not hearing them anyways. As they start to de-escalate, they might go from that yelling, venting, screaming to just having a strong complaint. and there'll be some more natural pauses in that conversation and more thought process. And you see that they're engaging a little bit more of that rational mind.
Is there any advice you can give about when the de-escalation goes wrong? Like what steps do you suggest if things go wrong?
Yeah, just don't be afraid to hit the reset button. Sometimes we make mistakes. We're human, right? You might be talking to somebody and think, oh, I think this person's a C, and you're addressing them with all the details and accuracy and the specifics, and you're answering every question, and you're just not getting anywhere. You're spinning your wheels. And then you might realize, oh, this isn't working. I'm just making this person more upset. In that case, you might actually be dealing with more of a D who's trying to assert authority and control over the situation and arguing his case in front of you. So in that case, you just switch it up. Okay, I made a wrong decision. I was heading down the wrong path. That's okay. We'll divert and come back, try some options, try something different and see if that works. Um, Sometimes you'll be dealing with somebody thinking, oh, I can rapidly de-escalate this person based upon personality, and realize, oh, there's an impairment on board, whether it's physical or mental or drug wise, right? And then you got to realize, oh, I need to slow down. I need to take some time and space to develop a little bit better understanding.
Perfect. Is there anything that needs to be considered now that phones are an issue and immediately recording when students, witness any type of escalation?
So phones complicate things a lot. If you're able to get the student who's escalated away from the group, that's an important first step. Of course, if they're in an active emotional state, it's not going to be as easy to gain compliance. I know when I was at the alternative school in that setting, we would just remove the rest of the class from the room, whether that be give them a restroom break, take them to walk the halls or something. But that's also effective one way or another to get the audience away from the situation. David, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think phones usually make it easier because now you know what they're doing, what their intent is. They want to get some attention, right? It helps you identify that personality oftentimes rather quicker. And if it's other people recording, then that's okay. We've got our body cameras on. There's cameras in the hallways in the schools. Everything's being recorded anyways. It's nice to point that out to people too, because when the person you're trying to de-escalate realizes, oh, everything is being recorded and they're going to be held accountable for their actions, and you're being able to maintain your calm, cool, and collected status, it will help them realize, oh, maybe I need to do the same.
How does this theory, and I'm assuming they mean the DISC theory, change for early childhood kids?
So we've seen DISC be effective for elementary age children. I suppose with early childhood, this individual's talking like preschool. I can't respond to that specifically. I've not seen the research regarding the effectiveness for early childhood.
Does placement of additional security personnel matter when it comes to de-escalation in reference to a clock? Anthony, Coach, can you provide a little clarity on your question, please? Does placement of additional security personnel matter when it comes to de-escalation in reference to a clock?
I think what he's referencing is probably traditional officer safety tactics. We're
Like
always going to
someone
stay
at the
out.
12 or in front of the, like okay. Like someone at, okay.
Yeah, we're always going to follow the single voice concept. So one person should be the contact at all times, right? If you're dealing with somebody who's in some sort of crisis and maybe they're suffering from schizophrenia and they got voices in their heads telling them to do one thing, and now you've got one officer talking to them, become a one-on-two conversation. Now you add a second police officer in there, and now it's a one-on-three conversation. It just adds confusion. So we need to make sure we're following that single voice concept as far as positioning. Follow your department policies, procedures. As always, stay safe, stay out of the red zones, use good tactical positioning, best square to the threat, gun sight back, all that good stuff.
I don't think I see any other questions in the chat. Are there any final thoughts from you, Dr. Lynn or Sergeant Belasing? Any final thoughts?
So I will just reemphasize these approaches are useful for both the SROs and the school staff. And then one thing we didn't mention, de-escalation is effective until it's no longer effective, meaning if an officer has to go hands-on or even a school staff member has to use their training to go hands-on, that needs to follow their policies and procedures. We don't want people trying to de-escalate when a situation is so escalated that someone needs to be removed.
Yeah, we don't teach anything that's rocket science, right? We're teaching officers a lot of tools and techniques that they learned the hard ways over the years. It took me probably 10 to 15 years to learn a lot of these techniques through trial and error. But then when I went and I took this course and they time collapsed my 15 years of law enforcement into a 2-day course, and the light bulb just went off as to why certain things worked so well with certain people. It's just a great way to get that experience to our officers a lot sooner.
We thank you both so much again for being here today and providing us with such valuable information. To our audience, if you have any questions that were not addressed today or need any additional resources, please reach out to us at the Safer Schools Training and Technical Assistance Clearinghouse at our email. It's listed on the slide. You can reach us through our website at saferschoolsclearinghouse.org. On our website, you can also access relevant training and technical assistance, as well as a comprehensive resource library we have there for your convenience. Remember, all of our services are at no cost to you. So if you have any specific requests for assistance, any technical assistance requests around school safety, please reach out to us. Maybe you have some specific training needs or want to do a peer-to-peer exchange, whatever it is, just reach out and we will let you know if we are able to assist you. You can also join our Safer Schools Info Exchange through the Clearinghouse to connect with others in the field. If you are interested in joining our smaller community of practice, you can also submit a general inquiry on our use our contact form on our website for that. For any future learning about opportunities for our Knowledge College series, such as what we've done here today, we will notify you via email when registration is available.